Bread of Life Bible Study. I'm your host, Pastor Derek Thomas, and my prayer is that the Bible study today truly blesses you, strengthens you, encourages you, and teaches you how to be a carrier of the bread of life for a dying and sin-sick world. God bless. So tonight we're going to be picking up from where we left off on the series, the series that we started, because I said so. And I don't know if you all had an opportunity to see last week's Bible study, but the foundation's been laid, and what God desires to do is continue to build upon that foundation. We talked about words that work, and we talked about the importance of words. And as you can see behind me, I hope you can see behind me. As you can see behind me, the banner, because I said so. Because my screen's not full, but it says obedience, holiness, and victorious living, and that's what this month is all about. And it just seemed like the natural progression from our month of faith, which everyone did a phenomenal job in the weeks that they taught, and such a phenomenal job that Lord's blessed me with an idea of how to keep the dialogue moving, and we'll talk about that later on. What we want to do is build off of where we were last week, where we left off last week. And when you get a chance to listen to the Bible study or watch it, if you've not heard it or seen it, you'll understand. We're going to be talking about obedience this week. We did with obedience, and as you can see, the title here is obedience. Obedience is better through your sacrifice, and it's purposely a play on words, because what the world tends to do is they tend to take something and make it sound good. And I said this last week. I believe I said this last week in the Bible study, and I'll say it again now. A good thing is not always a God thing. Amen. It's not. It's not always. It's not always a God thing, and that's by the divine. The design is not always a God thing, because many times things can seem good, things can seem right, things can seem like this is how it's supposed to be, but you have to pay very, very close attention, and you have to know there's another dynamic. They talk about breaking through the third wall, or breaking through the fourth wall. It's breaking through a dimension into an area that's going to be the proving ground for what it is that you're trying to do. And in this case, it's obedience. And I guess a good starting point tonight would be to ask, if I asked you to define obedience, what would your definition of obedience be?
Submissive, a submissive response, a completely cooperative response to instruction.
Okay. I like that. A completely cooperative response to instruction. I like that. I want to file that. We're definitely going to get back to that. What else?
Doing what you were told to do.
Okay. Doing what you were told to do. Very good. Very good. And anything else? Okay. And if not, that's okay. That's fair. If not, it's all right. So everything that you all said is absolutely right. And it's a lot of what I thought obedience was. And it is, in fact, what obedience is. But when God began to help me see it from the standpoint of it being a part of our living because he said so, it became so much more than that, And when I began to look at it, what he's been showing me throughout this period of time in preparing for these teachings, and even now as we're going through them, is that the three things that I put at the bottom of the screen for the theme this month, obedience, holiness, and victorious living, they're all interrelated. You can't effectively have one without the other two being at play in your life in some way, shape, or form. You can't live a life of obedience without it being a life of holiness and you having some victory. You can't live a life of holiness without there being obedience in it and victorious living being the end result. You can't have life that's truly deemed victorious by the scriptural standards if you're not walking in obedience and not striving to live a life of holiness. And as I began to look at it, the example that God gave me that we're going to be looking at tonight as we look at the things that he taught me, and we're not going to get through them all tonight because the Lord didn't let me get through them all as I was just putting all this together. We're going to be looking at Genesis 22, the 22nd chapter. We're going to be looking at the first 13 verses. 13 is significant because that's the number of victory. And where I get that from very, very quickly, if you go back to the story about the Battle of Jericho, it says that for 6 days, God had the children of Israel walk around Jericho one time and not say nothing. But the seventh day, he had them walk around 7 times. And after the 7th time, he blew the trumpet and told them to shout because the Lord gave them the city. So when you add 7 and 6 together, 7 and 6 is 13. That's where I get that from, just so you know.
Okay.
But anyway, when you look at Genesis, the 22nd chapter, it begins to lay out the criteria for sacrificial obedience, which is where I got the title from. Obedience is better through our sacrifice. You know, the world says obedience is better than sacrifice. And from a flesh standpoint, it is, because obedience keeps you from getting chastised, from getting disappointed, from getting beat down, from getting whatever it is that's negative to your flesh. But when we're talking about it from a spiritual dynamic, it's better through our sacrifice. It doesn't mean that the obedience doesn't mean that we're going to be void of pain. We're going to be void of challenge. We're going to be void of making heart-wrenching decisions. But it's in the midst of making those heart-wrenching decisions that we find through the obedience, the understanding and revelation that it takes to walk and live in holiness and to walk in victory. And that's what this passage began to deal with. And there are like 6 or 7 basic points, and we're going to get through probably maybe 3 or 4 of them tonight. But the first point of what obedience is, since I asked the question of what is obedience, obedience first and foremost is taking God at his word, even when we don't understand. You know, even when we don't understand his word, even though we don't understand how his word is going to work, that's when we have to take him at his word and just believe that it's going to work. And the second verse of Genesis 22 rather, excuse me, is really kind of the jump off point here, kind of jumping in the middle of the story. And it's saying here to take thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains, which I will tell thee of. Now, all of us growing up, you know, our parents gave us what I call, you know, simple commands. You know, take the garbage out, wash the dishes, take a bath, clean your room, do your homework, whatever it might be. And in most cases, we did it blindly. But every now and then, if they told us to do something, you know, they may tell us to do something and we might take pause. They might say something like, well, I know for me and in our house, you know, Chris, you know too, you know, when mom would tell us, you know, go outside and get a switch off the tree. It's like, wait, what?
Right.
What? Dude, huh? You know, because inherently, when we pause because we're at the surface, we pause because we're trying to get understanding. But subconsciously, we're pausing because we feel like our flesh is in danger. Our flesh is in danger of being disrupted. Our flesh is in danger of being upended. Our flesh is in danger of experiencing something traumatic or experiencing something negative. So I can only imagine, you know, Abram, who, you know, beginning in Genesis 12, you know, get up and leave your country and leave your kindred and go to a land that I'll show you. Okay, God, I'll go. And he took Lot with him, which he wasn't supposed to do, but God continued to bless anyway. And he walked him through the whole thing with the order of Melchizedek. And he walked him along with Lot and allowed him and Lot to separate. He walked them through the trials and tests and pitfalls that they had faced. He walked them through everything, even with Sarai laughing and everything else. When he tried to give her away and pretended it wasn't his wife, God kept him through all of it. And so he had a resume. He had an understanding of who God was, but even in the midst of having an understanding of who God was, when God hit him with this was something that he had never hit him with before. This son is the son of promise. We have to understand the significance of Isaac. Isaac is the son of promise. Isaac is the son of promise that Abram messed around and made Ishmael because he didn't think the promise was going to come true. So Abram's been in a few different places. He's been in positions where I understand and know what God could do. He's been in positions where I've listened to God and I've not believed it and I've done what I wanted to do. And he's been at all points in between. So he understands all the different points and he understands all the different places, kind of like us that have professed the name of Jesus Christ. When we're new in the faith, you know, it's one thing if you don't know better. But if you know better and still opt not to do better, the chastisement is much more severe. And many times
Mm-hmm.
that's the case because we just hard-headed, just to keep it 100. We're just hard-headed. We're creatures of habit. We want what our flesh wants. But obedience, godly obedience, understands that it may very well mean a sacrifice. It might mean making to have a decision that's heart-wrenching, that have a decision that looks like there's just no good way for this to turn out. And in making that decision, you don't turn away from that decision. You make that decision, understanding and knowing what I know now. You know, when mom would say, go get that switch off that tree. You know, it might hurt in that particular moment, but it was designed for a greater purpose to make us better. And as we continue to grow in God and understand that everything in life that happens, good, bad, or indifferent, is ultimately because he says so, we'll be more apt to obey God and truly take him at his word. Because when we take him at his word, the obedience dynamic, though it might mean a sacrifice for us, the obedience dynamic will bless us. The word lets us know that as long as we continue to trust in the Lord with all of our heart, as the word says, and lean not to our own understanding, but in all of our ways acknowledge him, he'll direct our path. And that in all of our ways acknowledge him, that's the part that trips a lot of people up. So God, you mean you want me to honor you in all of my ways, includes me giving what I see as my last? Yeah, it does. It means giving something that I may not get back. Yeah, absolutely. Because we have to understand the premise of the giving. Our flesh thinks that the giving is like spending money, you know, and we all good at spending money. And if I had to sit here and tell you where all my money went today that I spent, I probably couldn't tell you. If I did tell you, I probably said the majority of it went in my stomach to eat. That's probably what the majority of it went. You know, but the give that God is talking about here is an investment. He wants us to be willing to invest in him. Obedience is taking God at his word. We may not understand how it's going to work. We don't know how the stock market works. I couldn't sit here and tell you tomorrow the stocks I'm invested in are going to rise this much or going to fall that much. I don't know. I'm just trusting that it's going to work. Why? Because I'm taking the individuals that I deem the experts on the stock market at their word. I'm taking the concept of the stock market, of buying and selling, of trading at its word. Here's the one that I want us to catch, is taking it the same way that people that invest in stocks take it. The stock market is a long-term investment. That's a long-haul commitment. Some people jump in, some people jump out, but the individuals that really, really make the money and make it, and it lasts and it becomes wealth, are the ones that leave it there for generations, long-term. They'll leave it there and will it to their children's children. They'll leave it there and just tell the kids, look, don't touch it, leave it there. Because a basic principle of banking is individuals that banks lend to are individuals that on paper look like they don't need no money. But they're coming to you because they need money. And it sounds absolutely insane, but that's the way it works. With God, though, the investment is an eternal investment. Because what we're doing, we're not trying to sit here and try to figure it out. I'm just taking you, God, at your word. I'm taking you at face value because your credit is good with me. I'm taking you at face value because you've shown me in the word that you can do all things but fail. And since you can do all things but fail, I'm going to take you at your word. I may not understand it. I don't understand how a black cow can eat green grass and put out white milk. I don't know how he does that. I couldn't tell you. I have no clue. But what I do know is that it happens because I drink a glass of milk enough to know that the milk really does exist. I've had enough beef to know that the cows really do exist. I see the grass every day, so I know it all exists, but it's not for me to understand. It's just for me to worship God in the midst of. And God is saying to us in so many areas, you know, take your only opportunity, take your last $umpteen, take the last energy you have. Take the last shot that you feel you have and take it, use it, invest it. Allow me to grow it. Allow me to take it and multiply it, because that's what obedience is. Obedience, and you all kind of alluded to it. Obedience is taking God at his word first, and after that is doing what God tells you no matter what. And I think Melanie, you said that. Doing what God tells you no matter what. No matter what. Doesn't matter. You know, there's another word for that in the Bible. Do y'all know what that word is? But that's another word for what that saying is.
What doing it no matter what?
Yeah, doing what God tells you no matter what. You know what another word for that is?
Faith.
That's it. That's exactly what it is. It's faith. Obedience is faith. It's faith. Obedience
At
is
work.
activating your faith. Faith at work. Exactly. Exactly. And it's so profound because when the word came to Abram of what God was asking him to do, and when I took this and I put it next to like a side-by-side comparison, split screen, I put myself on one side, hearing my mom tell me to go get that switch. And I put Abram on the other side, hearing God tell him to sacrifice his son. And I look at my reaction and tried to find every way in the world I could find to not get a switch or to get a twig that was super small or find a way to not have to go through what I was going through. But look at what verse 3 says Abram did. And Abraham rose up early in the morning and saddled his ass, his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up and went unto the place of which God had told him. Didn't say he gave God any lip service. Didn't say he tried to go out and find little bitty twigs. Didn't say that he tried to play let's make a deal with God. God, look, I heard what you said, but let's make a deal here. I mean, come on now. This is my son. You don't understand. This is my son, my only son. You don't understand. But what Abram realized is that God, unbeknownst to him, really did understand, because even before we got to this point, all the way back in Genesis, when what happened in the garden happened, the plan had already been come up with and made in heaven, and Abram was part of the 42 generation journey that Jesus, the Christ child in flesh, had to make to come and put a definitive end to all this, to end the old covenant and usher in the new. And when we do what God tells us to do, no matter what we potentially are doing is positioning ourselves to be used by God to put the end in some places to errors in other people's lives and even our own. We talk about in sports when there's a changing of the guard in championships, and in Chicago when the Bulls finally lost the title after six times, or even more so when the Bulls ascended to the title in 91 after, I believe, the Lakers had it like those 2 or 3 seasons. They were saying it's the dawning of a new era. It's the dawning of the Jordan era. You know, whenever there's a big change, it's the dawning of a new era. And it doesn't mean that the end of the old era has to be a bad thing, because it's just a transition to a new era, which means with a new era, it brings new energy, it brings new opportunity, it brings new insight, it brings new vision. And that's what God desires us to do when we position ourselves to be obedient to God, obedient unto death, whether it's physical death, whether it's a spiritual death. In most cases, it's death to aspects of our lives that may not be as productive as God desires them to be. But there are aspects of our lives that are critical and that will make a definitive difference in the lives of other people. So that if we allow God to just kill that stuff, kill all the flesh, if we crucify our flesh daily, truly crucify our flesh every day, and let God's spirit live and shine in us, and let God arise in us and truly live out none of me, God, and all of you. And we truly and earnestly do that and truly and earnestly mean that. What God will begin to do is he'll begin to move in ways that we could never imagine. And he'll begin to move in ways that will just absolutely blow our minds, because in the process of him moving through us, he's blowing the minds of other people. He's ushering in a new era in their lives. We don't know the spiritual state of the people that we're dealing with. We don't know. Some may say that they know Christ, but we don't know what the health of the relationship is. They may say they know him, and they may just know him on a passing basis. They might just say hi and bye. They may know him, but they could be experiencing hurt right now. They may say that they know him and operate, as the word says, with a form of godliness, but they're denying the actual power because they speak it and they talk about it, which is kind of foreshadowing where we're going next. But they don't actually put the oomph behind what they're talking about to really make a godly difference. And what God is calling us to do, not only in the midst of this study tonight, and not even only in the midst of this series, but what God is truly calling us to do as living witnesses. And I don't know if you all had a chance to see the affirmations I sent out a couple of days ago. What he's truly calling us to do is what he tells us to do, no matter what. If it's comfortable, do it anyway. If it's uncomfortable, do it anyway. If you like what I'm telling you, do it anyway. If you don't like what I'm telling you, do it anyway. The word puts it this way: weary not in well-doing, because there are two words that we can all hang our hat on, and that's due season. Weary not in well-doing, the word says, because in due season, it goes on to say, you shall reap if you faint not. See, with God, there are absolutes, and God is a much better investment than the stock market. In the stock market, there's no absolute, but in God, there is an absolute, because with God, due season always comes. But many times, due season is prolonged in some people's lives, and as much as I hate to say it, due season never comes in other people's lives because they give up being obedient. They give up. They get to the point of saying, well, God, what you're asking me for, it's too much. It's too hard. I can't do that. You asking me to give up my only son? You're asking me to, you don't understand how much I love this boy. God's like, I do. I understand exactly how much you love him because I loved him first. How many of you know that before we were a twinkle in our parents' eye, God knew each of us by name? He knew each of us by name. And guess what? When we breathe our last breath here and close our eyes, our bodies are going back to the dust from whence they came. But the essence of who we are is going ultimately back to God, pending what's found out in judgment, which is where the obedience dynamic comes in. All of us, no matter what we go through, are going to go through something. All of us are going to experience a season of joy. All of us are going to experience a season of pain. And I'm painting very, very broad and very, very generally, but I'm doing it for a reason. And since we have the capacity to choose, God allows us to choose. You want your joy here up front? Or do you want your joy towards the back? Or do you want your joy somewhere in the middle? The reason why is that since the principle of sowing and reaping works, that means that there's an uptime and there's got to be a downtime. And a whole lot of people are front loading and want to get all their joy now, want to get all their joy here on the earth. And what they're forgetting is that there's some place that we go after we leave here. We're just passing through here. There are a whole lot of individuals that the word lets us know and shows us that we're just passing through and we have a job to do while we're here. And as we're doing our job, the Lord will provide for us and give us not only the creature comforts, but the desires of our heart, as long as we understand what our assignment is. A lot of people are like, man, this is kind of nice. I kind of like it. There's a lot of space here and a lot of sun, and I'm liking the beach, or I'm liking the view, I'm liking this and that. I could get comfortable. I could get used to this. But we're not supposed to get used to it. What we're supposed to do is understand that it serves a purpose. And the purpose that it serves is to keep us as we seek to fulfill our purpose here in the earth. That's why I'm being a living witness. It's a transient proposition. It's something where we're moving, we're on the move. We don't have time as a church to sit stagnant. We don't have time as believers to sit stagnant because there's so much happening in the world today. There used to be a time where you could say you miss a day, you miss a lot.
Right.
I was at work today and I had the news on, but I turned the news off. And in the time I had the news off, it was probably about maybe 5-6 hours. When I got in the car to come home, I turned the news on and I'm listening to like a live reporter live in Palestine, marching with people that were marching because of what happened. So and I wasn't supposed to do it. I know I was driving, but I just glanced down at the screen of my phone because I saw a notification come through. I look at the notification, and like 30 some odd people have gotten hurt, and some folks have gotten killed from attacks that took place over the weekend in skirmishes between Israel and Palestine. Well, whether you know it or not, those are like key players in the word, particularly as we get closer to Revelation, though they're not
Oh
called
yeah.
by the modern day names, they're called by the name that they were originally given. This is why
Mm-hmm.
names matter. And as we understand names and understand the times that we're in, we realize we ain't got time to sit around doing nothing. We don't have time. We've got to be willing to do whatever it is that God calls us to do, because the obedience is designed to give him glory, and the sacrifice that we may go through might be a great sacrifice. But with the sacrifice comes a blessing, you know, and this is where what you all said earlier, I think Brother Chris, you said, and I don't remember the exact verbiage you used, but that's why I said you kind of foreshadowing. The third thing that obedience is operating in faith, not just speaking on faith.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's hidden over here. Bless you, Sister Davina. It's good seeing you. Not just speaking on faith. And a lot of us are good at that. A lot of us are good at speaking on faith. It sounds good. It sounds good to say this and that. It sounds good to say the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the people and they that dwell therein. That's true. But when you're really in that situation and your back's against the wall and you have nothing, are you willing to say that? Are you willing to say that and believe that and function in that? And this is where Abram was put. By the time we get to verse 5, I can only imagine what was going through his mind as they rode out there, because he didn't have the luxury of jumping in a car like we do and just punching it and rolling down the highway at 55, 65, 70 miles an hour to help clear his head. He had to ride on the back of that donkey, which don't go that fast. And he had to really think about this. And I would venture to guess that the enemy was probably shooting thoughts through his head as well. See, God gave you this child that he says a so-called promise, and now he's wanting to kill it. What kind of God is that? Sounds a lot like what the enemy does to us when we're standing right at the threshold of something great. Right when we're standing right at the threshold of going to the next level in God and the next level in faith and the next level in what he has for us. Because to get there, we need the faith. Faith is the key that unlocks the door. But many times we stand in our lives, and so many people transition out of here, standing in the doorway of a door that's wide open for them. And emotionally, they call it fear. Realistically, it's a lack of obedience. The door is open. This is what you prayed for. The door is open. I unlocked it. You have the faith. The faith was the key. You turned the key. You believed it. You confessed it. You spoke it. The door is open. Walk on through. Well, God, I really can't walk on through. I don't see where my foot's gonna land when I get to the other side. The devil's like, that's right, because you really can't see it in there. You don't know what's going on. There might be nothing there. It could just be a trap. Why don't you close the door and just stay right here? Sacrifice. What we choose to sacrifice and how we choose to sacrifice has a direct bearing on ultimately what doors our obedience to God opens and what doors we walk through or don't walk through. This is why we got to operate in faith, not just speak about it. This is what Abram did in verse 5, when it didn't say here that when they got to where they were going, that Abraham took his son and they took off running off into the wilderness because he was scared. But I love what he did here, because he worked this thing out. He spoke this thing. This is why I got caught and I wasn't able to get through the whole thing, because when I got here, I had to really stop and just stay here for a minute and really, really think this thing through. You know, and it says in verse 5 that Abram said to the young men, so he didn't come by himself, abide ye here with the ass, or wait here with the donkey, stay here with the ride. And me and the lad are gonna go over there and worship and come again to you. Now, in verse 2, God told him, plain as day, I want you to take your son. I want you to sacrifice him. I mean, I want you to kill him. I want you to bind him up. Abraham knew what that meant. I want you to bind him up and I want you to kill him. Yet here in verse 5, Abraham is saying that we're going to go worship and we're going to come back to you. So the question I want to put on the floor is this. Why do you think Abraham, knowing what he heard in verse 2, was able to say what he said here in verse 5? That's my question. Anybody?
Because though he may not have known how,
Mm-hmm.
he had a relationship with God to know enough that without saying it, that he knew he had always provided and he would provide. He didn't know how he was going to give the solution, but he knew that he was going to provide one because God cannot lie, and he had made specific promises to him about Isaac.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's right. That's right. Absolutely right. Anyone else want to have anything to add? Anybody else?
I was just thinking about, I mean, in other parts of scripture, not necessarily like before that, but
Sure.
how God doesn't tempt man. So he doesn't give you a gift and then snatch it back, you know,
Right.
like, and he had given.
His gifts and calling are without
Yeah.
repentance.
There you go. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's right. That's right. Both absolutely right. Absolutely right. You know, and that goes back to what we talked about earlier about the stock market. You know, people that jump in and buy stock, and I'm guilty of it too, but and I'm glad in most cases I'm guilty of it. People that jump in and buy stock, 9 out of 10 times, I don't care how many prospectus are printed, I don't care how many commercials are on TV, I don't care how much research the talking heads do on CNBC and Bloomberg. You know how 9 out of 10 people get involved in the stock market?
How's that?
They talk to people that they trust.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
They talk to people that they trust, and the people that they trust say that it's a good idea. And they just take them at their word. Or in other words, they have faith in what they say.
Mm-hmm.
And they have faith enough in what they say to not just talk about, man, that's a good idea, but they actually put some skin in the game. They put some money in the game. And they spend money, and I mean money in some cases, to get involved. Not because of what they know, not because of what they see, but they're taking someone that they trust at their word. They actually get the concept better than a lot of believers do as it pertains to God. God desires us to take him at his word, and take him at his word means that we put the thing that we have that's the most valuable to us, which for us is our very lives. You know, people talk about put your money where your mouth is. Put your life where your mouth is. Put your actions where your mouth is. Put the operation of your faith where you're speaking about your faith is. You got to do something. The word talks about faith without works is dead. It profits nothing. There's that word again, profit. Because people don't get in the stock market to hang an L on their finances. People get in the stock market because they're looking to get a return on their investment. They want to make a profit. They want to wind up in the black. They don't want to be in the red. And God desires us to be the same way. Our obedience through our sacrifice, it might be a sacrifice. We talk about the offerings that were given in church, the widow's mite versus what the rich person gave. And Jesus talked about, as I paraphrase, what the widow gave was of greater value to the kingdom because it was all she had. Versus what the rich person gave, because it was just a little something that they just threw, something that they didn't really value, because what they gave in relation to their plight spoke volumes, not about their riches naturally, but their wealth spiritually. Because the widow that gave the mite, while it was all that she had naturally, she understood spiritually what she had because she knew God. And she was taking God at his word. God, this is all I have, but all I have in your hands is going to give me a return on my investment more than I could ever make trying to do this thing on my own because I know you. That's what obedience is. Obedience is saying, because I know you, I'm going to do more than just talk about it. I'm going to do it. Going back to the door example. The door, the faith is a key. That the key was put in, lock was turned, doors open, can't see a thing. I'm walking in anyway. And I'm walking in believing that when I put my foot down, it's going to land on something. Martin Luther King put it this way: faith is taking that first step, even when you don't see the staircase. That's what God is calling us to do. He's calling us to be willing to take that first step. We all took the first step back in December. Y'all all could have said, okay, you crazy. I'm not going with you. But God has blessed us every step that we've taken. And the blessings have gotten bigger and more expansive and just more, I don't want to say crazy because they're not crazy, but just more huge than the previous. And what that does is that it should garner the boldness, and it should build up our boldness so much so that we begin to even more so be living witnesses that God has called us to be. Let our witness go forth and truly make a difference in the lives of other people, because that's when we begin to take the return on our natural investment that we're getting spiritually, and we're taking that now and invested it in the ground that God wants us to really invest it in. He gives us the resources and natural resources to make a spiritual impact. That's where God's treasure lies. God provides the money that we need to do what needs to be done, but he provides the money that we need to do what needs to be done, because it's not about the flesh, it's about the souls. You need a house here, I'll give you a house, that's not a problem. The souls are what we're after. That's what's valuable. And it takes time to cultivate. It takes time to plant. It takes time to sow that seed. It takes time to nurture that seed. And obedience, the fourth one here, is probably going to be the last one we deal with tonight, is the essence of your legacy. I said earlier about how, individuals that really get the concept of what the stock market is and what stock are for, it's a long-term proposition. They will it so it becomes an inheritance for their children, and their children do the same and pass it on to their children without even realizing that they're lining up with the word. The word lets us know that a wise man leaves an inheritance for what? His children's children. Why? Because that wise man is the essence of that legacy. Were there no wise man, there'd be no inheritance to leave. If there's no inheritance to leave, that means that there's struggle and that there's plight. God doesn't want us to struggle. He doesn't want us to strain. He doesn't want us to be in a position of negative plight. He wants us to be in a position where we can be a blessing to other people. And I'm talking way beyond dollars and cents. I'm talking about the spiritual legacy, because that's where the value is. And that's what came about here in verse 8. Still looking to go make the sacrifice. It's not even done yet. And look at what Abram is saying to his son, to the one that in man's eye is about to get sacrificed. It's kind of like when you watch a horror, well, I don't watch them anymore, but when you watch a horror picture and everybody in the theater knows what's about to happen to the person that's talking. And everybody in the theater screaming, don't say that, don't open that door, don't go in there, don't do, because they know what's about to happen. But they're just going anyway blindly because they're not paying attention. And you always got that one that's trying to tell them, maybe this isn't a good idea. That's the one they need to be listening to, because that one that one right there that's saying it's not a good idea, that one right there gets it. This is bigger than just right here, right now. And far too many of us are seeking to live for the thrill of right here, right now, because they're looking, again, that joy continuum. They want the joy right here, right now. But they fail to realize that it's appointed to every individual once to die, and after death comes a judgment.
The judgment.
Meaning, if you had your joy right here up front to please your flesh, you pretty much shot your wad already. Now, that's not to say that there's not joy that we can experience here on the earth and still have our joy in eternity. There is, and that's what we're talking about. And it comes through obedience, because through obedience, it leads us to holiness. And holiness gives us the formula to have victorious living. And through victorious living, that's where we have the joy where the world couldn't give it to us and the world can't take it away from us. Because from that joy, we draw from that joy and begin to sow into others the essence of what becomes our spiritual legacy. This is why when Abram said to his son, You know, when his son said in verse 7, okay, Dad, I see the wood and I see the things for the fire. I see the matches. I see the log. I see the rope. I see everything. But where's the lamb? Because Abram had already started instilling into his son the whole concept of sacrifice and how blessings come from sacrifice. So Isaac already understood and knew that in order to have a blessing, there has to be a sacrifice. He already understood that. He already knew that in order for God's covering to come, not realizing that the covering is the anointing, which is basically the blood from the altar that's covering to keep you safe. He didn't even realize that in order to get that covering, blood has to be shed. And he didn't even realize that the blood that they were talking about in that instant was his blood. But Abram made it crystal clear. Don't worry about it, because God is going to provide for himself a lamb for the burnt offering. Notice that Abraham said that God is going to provide for himself a lamb. He didn't say God's going to provide for me a lamb, so I ain't got to kill you. Abram was fully and completely committed to God's way because he knew the man. We talk about I think it's an interrogatory questions: who, what, where, when, why, and how. So many people in life are looking for the what. You know, what do I got to do to get the glory? When do I have to start it? Where do I have to go to do this? Why do I got to even do it anyway? And the most important question, and all of you all are right there beating around it, and you all actually know the answer. The most important question in obedience is who. Because as long as we understand and know the who that we're striving to obey, we'll understand and know the what, when, where, why, and how. Because with God, the way is already made. With God, the way is already made. We may not understand it or know, but we just know if God told us to do it, it's going to turn out all right, because God can do all things but fail. But when the enemy's in the midst of it, it seems like the more questions you have, the answers to those questions are more questions. And before you know it, you're so lost in the questions that you've lost sight of where it is that you're going. And that's what the enemy wants. He's the author of confusion. He's like, if I can spin confusion off of this situation, if I can spin confusion off of this direction, if I can spin confusion by if the address is 2315 and I can flip it and I can have somebody flip it to 2351. And now there's an argument about we supposed to be at 15, it's 51. They're so busy trying to decide where the numbers are, they're missing out on the souls that are bypassing, the souls that are seeing them argue on the street, the souls that they should be praying as they figure it out. Because if the enemy's messing like that, the enemy knows that there's a blessing for the people there if you get there. And the essence of our legacy is teaching not only our natural children, but our spiritual children, those individuals that the Lord will bless us to cross paths with, that he'll use to sow into them so that they might come to know Christ. You may not even know who, and in fact, there is no may. Most of us don't even know who all of our spiritual children are. And there's a reason for that. And we've talked about it. The reason is the word says that one man plants, another man waters. But God is the one that provides the increase. And so many people are like, well, I won this many souls. I won this many souls. No, you didn't win any souls. God won the soul, because the word says that one person plants, another person waters. We've got to become proficient at planting and watering. We've got to become masters at planting and watering. Every day we should be putting seed in the ground, because when we put seed in the ground, we're guaranteeing, because the spiritual principle of sowing and reaping works. When we put seed in the ground and make sure that seed is nurtured, that seed is going to bring up a harvest. So we got to be mindful of the seed that we put in the ground, because if we put bad seed in the ground, guess what we got coming? We got a bad harvest.
Mm-hmm.
But if we put good seed in the ground, we got a good harvest. And this is where a wise man builds an inheritance for his children's children. Because if a wise man teaches their children how to plant good seed, guess what they're going to have coming up in their lives from being young? They're going to have good seed, going to have a good harvest. And if in that good harvest, they're learning how to sow seeds, they can start building wealth on their own while they're still growing, doubling their harvest, doubling their wealth, expanding their legacy. And this is what God desires to do through us. And we're supposed to be doing it because he said so. He said in his word that this was we're supposed to be doing it. Jesus said that the works that you see me do, you're going to be doing, and greater works than these. That means greater in magnitude in the situation. That means greater in number. This should be going on worldwide. We should be hearing of signs, wonders, and miracles just as frequently, if not more frequently, than we're hearing about death and destruction. But we're not. Why do you think that is? I pose that question to the class. Why do you think that is?
What did I say?
It's literally right in front of you.
They just said people aren't being obedient.
There it is. Disobedience. That's it. Disobedience. Disobedience. Obedience, again, is standing in front of a door that God has opened. And God is saying, walk on through it. And we do everything except walk on through it. And we wonder why the blessings aren't coming. And we wonder why the manifestation is not happening. We wonder why we become stagnant. We wonder why all the things that we don't want to happen start happening. Not being obedient.
Mm-hmm.
Lord said, walk. Why are we still standing? I can't see them going. Lord said, walk. Why are we still standing? There could be bears in there. The Lord said, walk. Why are we still standing? Imagine if that had happened here. Abram saying, Isaac, well, Dad, I see the wood and I see the rope and I see the fire, but where's the lamb? Well, son, God's gonna provide himself a lamb for the burnt offering. Yeah, but how are we gonna get the lamb up the hill? Because we need the lamb too, and usually we carry the lamb up there too, so we know what it is. We're gonna be what the questions. Well, meaning God gave you what to say. Say what God gave you to say. No more, no less. Be obedient. Well, it might put me in a bad light. Say what God told you to say, no more, no less. Be obedient. People might not like me. Say what God told you to say, no more, no less. Be obedient. But I might get hurt. You already know what I'm going to say. Say what the Lord told you to say, no more, no less. Be obedient. Might cost you your very life. Say what the Lord told you to say, no more, no less. Be obedient. That's what Jesus did. He made the ultimate investment. He invested himself. He literally lived out what people say in jest. He truly banked on himself. And you want to talk about breaking the bank? He broke the bank eternally. Because with the bank that he broke, he gave each and every one of us an opportunity to cash in our lives and to be a blessing to other people. Because we were doomed. Had it not happened, we were doomed. But by the Lord's mercy, we were not consumed. But by the Lord's mercy, we are not consumed. And that's only because of his grace and mercy. Yet he desires us to be obedient. Because in being obedient, it will keep us from walking headlong into tragedy. Doesn't mean it's going to keep us away from going through some things. Because in going through some things, that's the test dynamic that brings about the testimony. Think about the testimony that both Abraham and Isaac had after this. I can only imagine if they were in our first worship service, because we already stand on the fact that it's going to be standing room only. I would love to have Abraham and Isaac there that day to give their testimonies. And you know whose testimony I want to hear most? I want to hear Isaac's. I know Abraham's. I want to hear Isaac's. I can only imagine. Well, we know scripturally what Isaac went on to do, but I like the unplugged version. I'd love to hear the unplugged version, the quiet times, the behind the scenes times with Isaac, where Isaac sat back and really thought about, man, I could have been dead for real at 12, but God. I mean, I literally was on the altar. The knife was up on its way down. Yet I found the peace to just lay there. I didn't try to fight. Because Abraham wasn't a young man. at all. He didn't try to fight. He didn't try to run away. He didn't try to do none of that stuff. What he did was he banked on who he knew. He banked on his father, and he banked on the fact that his father knew best. And that's what God wants us to do. He wants us to bank on him because as our father, he knows best. That's the blessing of obedience. Obedience isn't about doing what's popular. Obedience is about doing what's right. Because when we do what's right, it makes us pleasing in the eyes and the sight of God. And I'd much rather be pleasing to God than popular with man. Amen. Living Witness Ministries is a church on the move that's dedicated to sharing the good news of Jesus Christ through the preached and taught word, community outreach, and practical ministry designed to save souls and change lives. You can sow into the ministry via our Cash App at $LW Ministries 2020. That's $LW Ministries 2020. Sow your seed in the good ground of Living Witness Ministries today. And thank you for helping us reach the world with the life-giving word. We pray that you were blessed by today's broadcast and would love to hear from you. If you have any prayer requests, praise reports, or would like to learn more about Living Witness Ministries, you can contact us by email at livingtowitness@gmail.com. That's the word living, the number 2, witness@gmail.com. Or reach us by phone at area code 404-955-8846. Again, that's area code 404-955-8846. Until next time, we encourage you to continue to live your life as a living witness.